I think the purpose of higher education is to train the next generation of leaders who go on to have influence within our larger society. I don't think higher education is solely comprised of academia. I think we have kind of a responsibility to understand the effect we have on wider society.
So, the purpose of higher education is to generally help yourself learn more, develop yourself, expand your horizons. But I think for women of color, higher education is very important because it gives you a seat at a table. It gives you legs to stand on, it gives you a voice, and it gives you that background and confidence to speak well and to really share your knowledge and your stories. And higher education also puts tools into your tool belt. And with that tool belt, you're able to break glass ceilings. And if you're not given a seat at a table, build your own table.
The purpose of higher education I see as being essentially helping us to cope with the world and with life. And that involves thinking clearly, understanding things. And that happens on the job, it happens in universities, it happens at the highest level of education there is, getting our doctorates in different fields. But the bottom line is that we really need to learn how to think. And that is a discipline that is often very difficult to implement. And it takes a lot of practice, a lot of listening, a lot of encounter with other ideas to work things through. And that then begins to help us to have a better understanding, first of ourselves and then of other people and of what this world is about.
I would definitely say that's a conflicting question because I think people want us to believe that the purpose of education is to learn new things and to have theories and understand the histories of education. And I think that when you actually experience it, that is not what it feels like. We are told that when we do it, we will get the job we want and we will make great money and we will be happy. And that is not where happiness comes from. And often you don't get the job you want either. So I think when I think of my experience, the thing I learned most from university was perseverance. I learned that there was going to be a lot of things I did not want to do that I would have to do anyway. I did not want to do the assignments. I did not want to go to class. I did not like the people for the most part. A bunch of my classes were large lecture classes where I was just one of many people the professor didn't care about. Or the professor, was not a trained teacher and just didn't care about teaching. They just wanted to say what their research was. And that in most cases wasn't interesting to me. I did love the readings and I tried on purpose to take courses that I either knew something about or wanted to know more about so that I didn't resent the whole time I was in education or in my university time, I guess. And that is an unfortunate reality of higher education that often the real goal is to figure out what your teachers want and do that, whether that is what you would do or not. Um, so yeah, university, great times. I made two friends. I did get 2 degrees, and mostly I try to forget it.
People go to university and college to do what, mommy?
What do you think, buddy?
Like to learn stuff for their life.
What is the purpose of higher education? My name is Grace Karram Stevenson, and I'm your instructor for the introductory graduate seminar, the first course of your master's for our higher education program here at the University of Toronto. And I'm so looking forward to exploring many of these questions with you over this semester. And for me, and for many of us, the last year has brought these questions to a real head because we've seen the increase in generative AI. Artificial intelligence that can actually write the academic papers for us. We call it generative AI because it generates the things that we used to generate. And of course, this has all sorts of implications for when I mark your papers. But more important than this, it has implications for the very nature of higher education and why you're doing a master's. I used to say that one of the goals of this program was to make you a mini expert. So if your department asked you to put together best practices on how to integrate students with disabilities into orientation, you could navigate the library, you could work through the databases, find the best research, and put together that sort of a recommendation. Or if your boss wanted you to do a policy brief on outcomes-based funding and the implications for Ontario, you could research this and present the point succinctly. Well, guess what? Generative AI can now do that for you. So what are we doing here? What is the purpose of graduate school? So now you see that when I ask this question of the purpose of higher education, it's not just a nice theoretical question that can get us started in our first class. It's highly applicable to you right now, wondering why you're doing this degree. Now, this is not the first time that we have had to ask major questions about the nature of university, research, teaching, and just generally how we engage with new knowledge. I actually first joined OISE in 2005. I was a student at the time, and we were having big conversations back then about the internet, specifically on how we taught history. We were realizing that with the infinite information available on the internet, students did not need us to teach them facts in school anymore. They could find all the facts they wanted on the internet. Who's the Prime Minister of Canada? When was the Korean War? What are the 4 points of Bourdieu's habitus? How old is Lewis Hamilton? And of course, is he single? Students could find all of this on the internet, and we didn't need to teach that to them. So what did we need to do? Well, we needed to teach them what to do with the information that they found. We needed them to be able to understand whether it was reliable, how to decide whether the histories that they were finding were representing all people, or did they need to look harder and follow alternative threads to find hidden histories? And then, of course, what possibilities did the internet have as a public publishing space to present histories that had been previously hidden? So many big questions surrounded the advent of the internet. And yes, things like the definitive textbook became obsolete. But we didn't become obsolete, and you won't become obsolete. Instead, I want you to join me this fall and ask the big questions. How is generative AI, like the internet before it, changing the face of higher education? Where is it making no impact whatsoever? Where do we still need the influence and the thoughtful moral thinking power of people to ask the ethical questions and to work for equity? Now, if we start any question on the purpose of higher education with a discussion on generative AI, that's actually very, very narrow. And it makes some assumptions about the purpose of university being only related to the generation of knowledge. And in fact, in the introductory clips that you saw from my various family and friends, there were very different views on what the purpose of college and university is. Everything from encountering new ideas to contributing to a just society. And if we traveled around Ontario to different colleges and universities, if we asked the people who attend them and the people who run them, what are the goals of higher education? What should the purpose or priorities of institutions be? Each person we talk to would have very different answers. Even within the University of Toronto, we might find that our education faculty, the teaching hospitals, or an undergraduate philosophy class, they'd have very different aims and objectives. They would want to explain to you where the university should be heading and what they would come away from at university, and they might have very different opinions. So whenever we enter this study of higher education, we are entering a world of complexity with different aims and different ideas. Now, each of you has come to this study of higher education, perhaps intentionally, perhaps through a strange set of circumstances. But whatever has brought you as a professional or as a researcher, you come with firsthand knowledge. You did not read a novel about higher education or watch a movie, you attended higher education. And this means that when you come to the study, it's not theoretical for you, but very, very practical. And this is great because it means we all come with different ideas about what universities should do. We come with different emphases. We come with different opinions on what should be prioritized at college and university. But this can also be challenging because whenever it's this personal for us, we have to find ways of listening to each other's ideas. So in this class, I've actually assigned you 5 other people, a group of 6, that will be your learning pod. I want you to use that space to have safe discussions and respectful discussions throughout the semester. We had a wonderful professor who passed away a few years ago in our department named Roxana Ng, and she used to say that you need to think about what should be said and you need to think about what needs to not be said. So I like your hair, great new haircut, that's a very nice thing to say. It's way better than the last haircut is not so nice. So as we move into those learning pods, I want you to remember that each of your colleagues brings an idea and an experience with higher education that might be different from your own. Try to listen to those new ideas. And in fact, try to understand a totally different view from your own. Are you a firm believer in private education? Try to understand your colleague who believes in public education. Are you a firm believer that everyone should have access to university? Try to understand your colleague who thinks we need elite spaces of intellectual discourses. Now, one of the big aims in this class is to help you develop your own approach and your own reflective space so that you can begin to articulate your views on higher education, based both on your experience and your professional work, but now through this course on your intellectual and research pursuits. We want you in this class to come away with an overview of the main issues that face higher education, the historic elements that have shaped it, and then to position your own professional and research agenda within that. Why do you see higher education in a particular way? And what can the scholars that you're going to read offer to you as you develop your own ideas? I am really looking forward to hearing all of your ideas and the stories of what brought you to this degree. Many of us happened upon this career in higher education very unintentionally. I don't know any kids who grew up thinking that they want to be a college registrar. But what brings us to university is often the same motivation, the same rationale behind what we think should be prioritized. And in my own story, that's very, very true. I did an undergraduate degree in international development at the wonderful Trent University, about 2 hours outside of Toronto. And I went into international development because I wanted to save the world. I wanted to help with women's empowerment. I wanted to drill boreholes in Africa or something. But when I actually did my own study abroad in Ghana, West Africa, they needed a grade 4 teacher. And so I spent this time in the classroom there learning how powerful and important education was for communities. And when I returned, I enrolled at OISE for my Bachelor of Education. And in that program, I learned about global education, and it helped to make sense of my experience in Ghana. Now, there were no jobs in teaching when I graduated in 2006, but my husband had been accepted to his MBA just outside of Philadelphia. And so when we arrived in the state of Pennsylvania, they didn't allow teachers with just bachelor degrees to teach. Now, of course, our bachelor degree was similar to a master's degree because it was after 4 years, but it was not called a master's degree. And so I did not get a teaching job in Pennsylvania. But fortunately, or unfortunately for my husband, but fortunately for me, the program that he enrolled in had fallen out of quality. It had been reviewed poorly. And so they had sent the dean on sabbatical, and they sent in a senior VP to help fix up the program, count the credit hours, review what students' opinions were, and he needed an assistant. And so he hired me as his special projects officer. And it was a great fit. I got to work on absolutely everything to do with higher ed, but I had no idea of the big picture of what I was doing. We had a major quality review that year that we had to accomplish. We were trying to get permission for a new program in the department. We were offering online training programs even back then to train professors on how to teach online. We were developing a new recruitment strategy in Canada, which of course they sent me on because I'm Canadian. And they also were hiring their first managerial level professional, someone to sit between program assistants and professors. And I was on that hiring committee, and it was fascinating. I mean, I think I was 25. I have no idea why they put me on the hiring committee. But they also had me work on things like the rebranding of the department and structuring how the programs fit within the overall mission of their graduate school. And I, again, didn't know the bigger picture, but I fell in love with working at universities. And my time in Pennsylvania really gave me sort of the activities and the experience without any knowledge about the broader systems. And now, when my husband graduated, we were hired to run a study abroad program in the Fiji Islands, and students would come over for a semester and they'd work on this rural campus on the beach. And we would teach them cross-cultural communication and anthropology and a whole lot of outdoor ed, snorkeling actually. And now, of course, it was an amazing experience to run the program. I believe in study abroad and the power of international education experiences. But what was more fascinating for me were the identity crises I saw the students go through. Fiji itself is a fascinating nation. It's divided between the indigenous Fijians, who own about 70% of the land, and then there's about 50% of the population that has South Asian background. And they were brought over at the turn of the last century as indentured servants. And now this population owns most of the businesses. And so you have this divided country between landowners and business owners, people who are fairly wealthy in a commercial sense and people who are wealthy in a communal sense. And it's led to huge debates at the university in higher ed. And this led several businessmen when we were there to start the University of Nandi. And this was outside the public system, mainly for students of South Asian descent. So the ethnic divides in the country led to a series of really interesting divisions within higher education. And of course, our American students entered into this, and then they all began to have identity crises related to study abroad. And this stemmed from the fact that they were from Christian universities in the US, so religious universities. But when they moved to Fiji, Fiji is an incredibly religious country. And so even though they identified as religious at home, they began to understand that a lot of the cultural influences on their lives in America were not religious in the same way they were in Fiji. And of course, when we came back to Canada in 2008, the economy tanked. And so my husband and I applied for like dozens and dozens of jobs. I think he did 150 that year. And I ended up working at a homeless drop-in center called All Saints Community Center. It's down at Dundas and Sherbourne in Toronto. Oisey still has a wonderful connection there with their sex trade worker drop-in. And so I worked there for a year, and I met people who in all outward appearances were not successful. So they weren't, say, contributing to our economy or to our society in a way that you might say is meaningful. And yet many of them had bachelor's degrees, if not master's degrees, and they loved learning. At one point, my husband, who worked there for several years after me, he actually arranged for people to audit courses at the University of Toronto because higher education was so important to them. And yet they didn't fit in those boxes of what we define as success. Now, this raised a lot of questions for me about the value of higher education. If it doesn't have a job or an outcome afterwards, is it still valuable? My experience working with Toronto's marginalized community would suggest that it is. So after that, I came to Oisey. I got my master's degree, right where you are right now, because I had so many questions about the programs that had been mismanaged, about quality reviews. I had questions about what happens when students move from one country to another and have these big shifts in identity. I had questions about what happens when higher education doesn't have like a job outcome or a purpose, but it's just so valuable because it gives dignity to vulnerable people. And Oisey provided this space for me to learn about all of this. And I realized that I come away from each of these experiences with a very different view of higher education. So in Pennsylvania, it was a liberal arts model, and this shaped how I began to view small-scale institutions. In Fiji, it was a para-university organization, organizations that sort of exist outside or adjacent to the formal pillars of education, but they offer programs around the world. And we see this in things like agents that help international students move abroad, or organizations and think tanks that inform higher education, but are not colleges and universities themselves. Fiji was also a space to think of the ethnic divisions that shape higher ed and how what we see as a meritocracy actually has layers of cultural divides and racial divides and ability divides and gender divides that we need to begin to name. So I want to encourage you to follow the threads of your own experience. Your experience is what brings you to the really big questions. And then through the research that we encounter in class, and maybe research that you then do yourself, that is where your good research questions take you forward. So when you finish this video, you are going to head to your learning pod. You're going to take a minute to sketch out or write some bubbly words, some things about your own journey. Mirror what I've done. Think of the event that you had, and then think of the characteristic or principle that comes out of it. This is how we're going to use some of our own experience as the analytic tool for this first class in understanding our views and the variety of opinions and perspectives we have on what higher education should be. So when the video is done, I want you to head to your learning pods. Now, what's going to inform this a little bit more? We have 2 readings this week. The first is by Philip Altbach. That's the one I attached to your original email. And this covers everything there is to look at higher education as a field of study. So go through this and begin to ask yourself, is this a current paper that still holds true? What might we add to this in the last 10 years since he wrote it? He actually doesn't engage in student experience or student success in the way that many of you will hope. So what kind of questions or additions would you make to this paper? At the same time, he does help to lay out the global sphere of higher education research in a way that's really helpful and begins to illuminate for you all the different aspects that you could explore in your own papers in this program. The second article is really important if you did not grow up in Ontario for higher education. It is a very clear, very readable piece by Dr. Jones. He's Oisey's former dean and a professor in our program, and he overviews the pillars and structures of Ontario's higher education system and Canada more generally. So please take a look at that, read through it. Even if you are from this system, it can just help you begin to understand why it works the way it works. And bring your questions to our first class next week. Okay, sidebar on questions. I have this thing where I've just noticed that when graduate students start their program, they're like not able to ask real questions. They want to like take time and make their question brilliant. So they're questions, they're about what we don't know. They don't need to sound brilliant. Please bring genuine questions. If there's a word you don't know, if there's a theory that makes no sense, say, I don't get this at all, please help. We are only going to learn together if we can admit the things we don't know. Chances are if you don't understand it, someone else doesn't as well. Maybe I don't understand it. We'll figure it out together. So bring real questions, things you actually don't understand, puzzles that the text raised for you to class. And now, I would like you to head to your learning pods. I would like you to think about your journey. You'll see a diagram that I made of my journey as an example. Make yourself a diagram, make a little video or a text message for your classmates, and share with them what experiences you've had in higher education and what that taught you about the purpose of higher education. I'm so excited to get to know each and every one of you. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you in class.